And I think I've set it so anybody who came in can unmute and ask questions later or as they like, or so I think we're good to go there. So, well, since we're kind of limited on time today, let's go ahead and get started. And if others join in, we'll just add them in as we go. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar sponsored by Education Advance. And our topic today is, how does feedback lead to educator growth? And hearing that topic, I right away thought of my colleague, Thomas Colabufo, and wanted to invite him to join in the conversation. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Dianna Whitlock. I have been I was a public school educator for 24 years, teacher and administrator. I then went to work full-time with Standard for Success, which is now a part of Education Advance. And that's been a really good fit. And one of the things I did in my time at Standard for Success was to do some research on the impact of giving educators feedback and how that impacts teaching and ultimately instruction for students. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Thomas Colabufo. And I do hope I have your name right, because I tell you what, I've known him for years, but I still have to think about it. So I always kind of have that fear of mispronouncing there. So let me know if I'm off there, Tom.
You got it.
Yeah, Tom is the superintendent at Central Square School District in Central Square, New York. And you just mentioned you've been there for 8 years.
Yes.
Yes. So, and he's a longtime user of the Standard for Success software and advocate of giving feedback to teachers. More importantly, he's a student advocate for student success and teacher success and that whole process of communication and keeping things open. So as we go through, I'm going to let Tom tell a little more about his background and how he came to be involved in the feedback process. If you have questions throughout, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then we'll also do a Q&A at the end and let everybody kind of have a little more conversation. So I will turn it over to Tom and let him sort of get things started talking about giving feedback and how that helps educators to grow.
Sure. So I've been superintendent here now. This is my 7th year as a superintendent. Prior to that, I oversaw the 5 elementary schools in the district, and I was the personnel director. Prior to that, I was an elementary principal in a neighboring district in Onondaga County for 4 years called East Syracuse Manoa, who also use Standard for Success. And then prior to that, I was an assistant high school principal in Oneida, New York for 4 years. Prior to that, I taught 10 years, 8 years in a middle school in the Fayetteville Manlius School District. And prior to that, 2 years in Dublin, Ireland in a K-12, like a castle right in Dublin on the bluff, which was beautiful. So I've been heavily involved in the feedback process from on the other side of the table as a teacher, and then as an assistant principal, overseeing elementary. And now it's very unique in my district because at Central Square, 90% of the principal's evaluation comes from the superintendent. So in order for me to be able to give accurate and effective feedback to all of my administrators, and we have 6 schools in the district, I have to go into the classroom to see the teacher teaching the lesson, because when there's a post-observation conference with the principal or assistant principal and that teacher, I need to be able to see the lesson, so then I'm able to look at the feedback that the principal, the administrator, is giving the teacher, and then I schedule my post-observation conference with the administrator about 3 days after that, where then I give my feedback on how the administrator gave their feedback. So it's a whole process. It is time consuming, but it gets me into classrooms. My Board of Education loves it. The teachers like it, and the administrators really tell me that they learned from those sessions.
That's wonderful. I know one of the things that has come up before when I was working with principals, and superintendents as well, any administrators, is, well, how do I evaluate my principals when I don't really see what they're doing? So you've taken that step to go in and really see what they're doing and how are they doing the evaluation and how are they giving feedback to those teachers. So that's really important. So yeah, that's great. What have you seen as a result of this? I guess, first of all, in the beginning, how did the teachers feel about you being in the classroom? And how did the principals feel about this in the transition piece of it?
So I followed a superintendent that didn't do it that way, that didn't go into the classrooms, and it was more just like a write-up, wasn't really, being in the classroom. So at first I had to get buy-in that the teachers knew that I truly cared about instruction. I truly cared about providing them with solid feedback just to increase their toolkit. And so what they told me after that first year is they finally had the consistency, because every teacher's worst fear is you have a different administrator coming in, especially in a middle school or high school where you have multiple administrators coming in to do evaluations. And then in New York State, the rule is that you have to have an outside evaluator. So then you have a district office person coming in. And I taught for 10 years, and I felt that I knew what good instruction was, but there was also this angst because it was like, what are they looking for? What is this? It really shouldn't be that. It should just be, what are they all looking for consistently? And so by having very clear rubric that we use from Thoughtful Classroom, and then the electronic system of Standard for Success makes it very easy that the teachers know exactly what the administrators are looking for, but really it's just what's good instruction. And we focus at the very beginning on what are those things in the classroom that should take place no matter what. That's the organization, the rules, and the process, and the positive relationships and the engagement. All of those things, it's easy to be able to be in a classroom and see, yes, there's true engagement. But then there's key indicators of how the teachers plan the lesson, how they actually delivered the lesson, and then how they use formative assessment. So they know right away before an administrator comes in there exactly what they're looking for. So the post observation is never a surprise. It follows the same feedback. So every one of my 30 administrators all go about it the exact same way. So it's the same focus and it's the same set of priorities, no matter who is doing the instructing or the supervising.
So you really had to build that culture that this is okay, that this is what we're doing. I remember, and I Dr. Tunnel and I did a session last Friday on the whole evaluation process and giving feedback, and kind of the old days when we didn't do that. And if an administrator walked into your room, there must have been a problem, and everybody got real nervous, and especially if the superintendent came in. And I remember at one district I was teaching 6th grade, and we got a new superintendent that year, and she was in my room a lot. And I started thinking, okay, what am I doing wrong? She's out, she's must be my last year, and she's gathering the documentation, because this was before we had this culture of feedback and this give and take. And when I had a conversation with her, she said, I taught 6th grade for 20 years. I love it. I just want to be in your, so it was not that, but we used to kind of have that mindset that if a superintendent or even sometimes the principal came in, there was an issue. So you really had to nurture that culture of, this is what we do. I'm going to be there. I'm going to do these kinds of things. And how did that go?
It was a huge cultural shift. But what I did from the very beginning, from my time in my previous district, is there's a strategy. It's called the 4 Ps to effective feedback strategy. And when I have the opportunity, I share this with all administrators. I go to Syracuse University, I'll go to Lemoyne College, SUNY Oswego. For future administrators, I share the strategy, and it's really not rocket science. The 4 Ps is this. The first thing you do in a post-observation is you provide evidence. So it's not making it where it's subjective, where it's just whatever somebody may feel their opinion is. Just like when you go into the doctor's office. When I walked into the doctor's office, there was a time I was a little bit heavier. The doctor didn't say, oh my God, Tom, you look fat. Like, he never said that, because I probably would leave. What he said was, okay, I need you to stand on the scale. I need you to take, so basically all the cholesterol, all these measurements, and then I'm owning it. It's me. I did those things. It's not the doctor saying, oh my God, you look terrible. Like, no. So I saw, and here I am, going, oh yeah, it was the holidays. I shouldn't have done that. So the 4 Ps, the first is you provide evidence. So the teacher, the administrator says, okay, you asked 36 questions, 4 students answered them. You had 3 transitions. One of the transitions was 6 minutes long. One was 1 minute long. So when you're done giving that, the teachers know, like, oh man, really? I only asked 4 people. Oh, I didn't notice. So it's not that angst. It's not that like power struggle. Then the next thing what we have the administrators do is praise them. There must be something genuinely that you can praise, because everybody likes to get some praise before they start to get critiqued. And then what we do is we shift into DeForest's 3 critical questions. We'll say, all right, to the teacher, the administrators will say, and I do this with the admin. So the administrator will say to the teacher, all right, so remind me again, what was the learning target that you used that day? Because it might have been 3 or 4 days before. What were the standards from the New York State standards that you used? And what were the attributes / competencies of Essential Square Learner that you incorporated? Those are our own district attributes, like, effective communication, problem solving, determination, those things. And so then they be quiet, and then the teacher will say, okay, well, the learning target was such and such. These were the standards that I addressed. And then the principal can praise something in there, or they can pose a question and they can say, that's fascinating. Now, what was the learning target the day before? What standard did you build upon? So that's about maybe an 8-minute conversation. Then they'll transition into the second critical question of a highly effective lesson. And that is, and how do you know the students observed it? How do you know the students learned it? And so there's your assessment piece. And if the teacher just kind of was the sage on the stage and just kind of lectured the whole time, that's when they would pose questions. How many students midway through do you feel really understood the learning target? And then that's when they can provide tools and strategies that they can help them with the feedback process. Then finally is the third question is, and what did you do when you recognized students were struggling or needed additional challenging because they quickly met that learning target? There's your differentiation. And as a district, we spent about 5 years and we've really mastered a common understanding, Dr. Caroline Tomlinson, on what it is: readiness, interest, and learning style, and what to do to accommodate those 3 different opportunities to engage students. And so that's it. So it doesn't matter if it's the high school or if it's at the elementary, the feedback and how they deliver it is always the same structure. Because, and then I will stop talking, but the hardest thing for any teacher is to tease out, does the student not understand the content or doesn't understand what's being asked of them? The same thing applies to teachers. The clearer that you can be with your expectations and how you align your feedback with what you're actually observing is if they're actually it's going to be impactful. Are they going to then be able to make change? Because if it's not, it's confusing, it's falling on deaf ears.
That's awesome. And in hearing the word, I mean, this wasn't easy work. You had to put a lot of time and effort into that, but I know the payoff is great once you get it where you want it to be. Because I've worked with schools that were doing this, they're breaking this down and saying, all right, let's look at our rubric. Is this what we value? Is this what we want to see? And what does that look like? And how do we practice knowing what you think good instruction looks like and what I think it looks like? And here's what our rubric and the research says it looks like. And how do we pull all that together and put a bow on it so that we can have this whole process kind of flowing, if you will, to where it's effective. I love your doctor analogy. I mean, that makes sense. It makes good sense that the doctor's gathering data, and that's kind of what we're doing when we're going in here. We're not looking for any kind of gotcha or any kind of anything such as that. It's not a quick compliance exercise, but we're gathering that data to see how do we get better, or what is this teacher doing really well that they could help someone else with? I mean, I think we forget that piece sometimes. We're not only looking for them to improve, but how could they help others grow?
And I have to remind some administrators from time to time. So I'll sit and I'll watch in their office, the principal or assistant principal sitting with the teacher, and it starts off and they'll start off giving evidence for maybe maybe 30 seconds. And then the administrator, not anymore this is happening, but in the past would say, yeah, and then it kind of got derailed. And then I didn't really understand what you were trying to accomplish here. And you could see the teacher, the look of consternation on the teacher's face where I don't care what good feedback the principal,
Yeah.
they've lost them. So I didn't say anything, but in my post observation with the administrator, I start off by saying, well, you welcomed the teacher and that was nice, but then the rest of it was just terrible. And their jaws go like this. And I said, stop right there. That's the exact same expression that the teacher was giving you. And then they start
Exactly.
like, oh my God. So that's when I say, stick to the 4 Ps. And then they get it.
Right. Yes. That's a really good guide. And I think that when we think about that gathering evidence, and one of the things, again, from our session last week at a virtual schools conference, was we talked a lot about the scripting and gathering evidence, because we said that's really kind of that secret sauce for the feedback. It's not just a checklist. It's not a, I talked about when I first started teaching years ago, and you just got a quick post-it, good job. Okay, that's nice, that feels good, but that's not feedback. And we really have to gather that evidence in order to get, that good feedback and where we want them to be. And I think it is so important that, and I know you all are using the Thoughtful Classroom you mentioned, and it's very clear, the Thoughtful Classroom rubric is very clear on what elements you're looking for. So that helps probably.
Well, and that's the other thing. So this district used to use the NYSET, New York State Standard rubric, and it had about 175 indicators. We have like 16 now, right? And so I didn't like it. And originally, I didn't like the Thoughtful Classroom one. I mean, it was great instructionally, but in my previous district, the only way to fulfill one observation is you had to go into the room 5 times. And I would say to the creator, Harvey Silver, it's not practical. So I rewrote a rubric that New York State approved, and it was the Thoughtful Classroom, but it was almost like power indicators, where in every lesson, these ones, and New York State approved it, and that's what we've used, and our teachers love it. It's just, it makes it so much easier rather than have a rubric in there that just doesn't align to what they're actually doing.
Right. And that's really important. I think that's important regardless of the rubric, or if your district creates one of their own, or if the state hands you something and says you have to use this. It's really important to make sure that it is well understood by everyone, that everyone goes through and practices as administrative teams. This is what we're looking for. When we talk about student engagement, this is what we want to see. And that your teachers know that it's all completely transparent. I know I worked with the school one time that wanted me to come in and work with the indicators on the rubric. And I said, oh, for your administrators, I think we already did that. He said, no, I want you to work with my teachers. We have a PD day, and I want you to show and talk about what the things on the items on the rubric are, and how that ties to what they're doing, and what does that look like, because I want it totally transparent so that everybody understands what's going on.
Correct.
Yeah, there's no surprises, no secrets. So, well, let's take a few minutes, open it up to questions for Tom and anything else that you may want to know about. And I know we have lots of other topics we could talk about, but I do want to stop and make sure that we have time for everybody's questions. So I think I have it where all you need to do is unmute. I have everyone where you can do that, but if you would like to ask a question, you can unmute and ask.
So I see a question in the chat. How do you make the feedback transparent and add to the teacher growth process? So I can tell you what we do. It's really spelled out for them. So what we do is we added a piece to our rubric to our evaluation process, where right after the observation, the teacher has 2 days to answer a couple of questions. And then the principal can then look at that and say, okay, let's say for differentiation, they are addressing readiness level by accommodating student content. And so those things right there make it even more transparent, because then when the principal comes in, there's such more of a targeted focus on that feedback, because everyone's on the same page. They're all speaking the same language. And the transparency that we have as a district is it's very consistent. Everybody knows exactly, I can't hold that, what our indicators are. We've done things where teachers would come in with an administrator to go into another classroom and then have a conversation after the fact. So there's iterator reliability. So we all know exactly what those standards mean. And we're completely transparent in how they're scored, how it's evaluated. I hope that answers the question about transparency.
Okay. Other questions? Anything else?
I think when it comes to feedback, there was a video that I would always show when I would go around and I would do presentations. It was, now I'm drawing a blank on the first name, but it's something butterfly. And what it was a classroom teacher. It'll pop into my mind. It was a classroom teacher that asked the students to draw a picture of a butterfly. And so it was elementary kids. And it didn't look like a butterfly. And then through power of feedback, the elementary teacher would say, okay, now what I want you to do, and they would go back, the 10th or 11th version looked like it was professionally drawn. And these are like second graders doing it. And so there's no way that they could have gone from something that definitely didn't look like a butterfly to the butterfly without that feedback. And that was part of the process and changing the culture here, is really focusing on the power of feedback. Because if the administrators are not giving great feedback, then whether teachers can move forward or not is 100% on them. It's like when teachers used to complain and say, I gave this test, and out of 25 kids, 15 of them failed it. They must have had a bad day. That's a question. That's an issue of bad teaching, not bad learning, when the majority of your students fail that. And so I think about feedback the same way. When I would watch administrators giving feedback to teachers, and then they would leave the post-observation, if I was confused on what exactly they were telling the teacher, then there was really no way that teacher said, oh, so I know how I can improve my questioning, or I know how I can improve my differentiating of the lesson, or what my wait time means. They wouldn't know that if the administrator didn't say, all right, I charted the first 20 questions. The average wait time that you gave was 2 seconds. And then the teacher's like, are you serious? I thought that was like 2 minutes. No, it's 2 seconds. Yeah. So the clearer people can be on the feedback, definitely the better.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of power in the numbers with that too, like you said, with the wait time and with, just those little things, how many students off task and those things. The numbers are really powerful. And I worked with some young administrators that said, I feel like a court reporter. Do I have to take down everything? Well, no, but if you can capture those conversations, those quotes, and if you can put some numerical data behind it, as you said, with wait time and how many students were off task and those things that we don't notice when we're in the teaching zone, that's really helpful. I agree. Oh, Kim found it. Austin's butterfly.
Yes. Austin's
okay,
butterfly.
There we go. Austin's butterfly. Okay.
There's a version that's about 8 minutes. I would suggest showing that to all administrators and all teachers, because there's nothing better that drives it home of the power of feedback than Austin's butterfly.
Austin's butterfly. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that because I'm not familiar with that. But that sounds like a good one. Yeah.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
Thank you for sharing that, Kim. Thanks. I appreciate that. So, other questions? I want to make sure I give enough wait time. That's what I'm doing here. Don't want to rush anybody.
That's right.
Well, I am a little curious too. Have you noticed any difference now that you've done so much work with this culture in your teacher turnover? Because I know that's one of the things that we found when we were doing some research as to schools that had used the software for so many years and how that impacted teacher turnover, teachers either leaving the profession or leaving the district, and how that related with that growth piece.
It's always a struggle in New York State. The New York State Education Department makes it increasingly difficult, whether it's teacher credentials, the requirements. It's like if they have to come up with a solution to a problem, I really wish they would put, 100 teachers in a room and have conversations with them than some of the things that they put out that just make it even harder for teachers and administrators to do our jobs. But I would say the teachers that have left, a small few, but we're very happy, honestly, that they left because they were not in it for the right reason. They didn't like the fact that when an administrator would say, okay, I observed a 40-minute lesson and I didn't see any student interaction. I saw a majority of students off task on their cell phones looking out the window. When the good teachers loved it, they loved it. They said, you know what, we have a clear focus right now. We know what our priorities are in the district because they sat at the table when we were doing our strategic plan, that they know exactly. And when we came up with the attributes of and competencies of the Central Square learner, we had people in the military. We had hundreds of people in our large cafeteria, including the teachers, where they were talking about what are those attributes that doesn't matter what career path someone's going to take. What are those skill sets? Effective communication was one. They all agreed on. So when I'm sitting in a classroom for 40 minutes at the high school or 80-minute block, and the kids never have an opportunity to talk to each other, I remind them that they sat at that table and talked about how important it was that students could collaborate together and could, process things together and can evaluate things, but they didn't give them a chance to do it. Or the best one is when a teacher says, I think all students should be as creative as possible, but then they don't really give kids an opportunity to create something to then be either assessed or that the students can have nice, joyful ownership of. And it's easy to remind them and say, what did they actually create that lesson? And then they're like, you're right. So really, it's like I said, when I go into the doctor's office, I've gotten in better shape because I would hate to go in there and he would just never judge me, but he would share all the data that clearly showed for the past 6 months, I didn't do what I needed to be doing.
Yes. And again, that's that ownership piece of, when I used to hold conferences, there's two kinds of teachers. There was the kind that if you made a suggestion, they broke into tears or ready to argue. And then there was the teacher that looked at a effective and said, how can I do better? How can I be highly effective? I mean, I think some of that's internalized because of that culture you're creating, that we can all grow. That's kind of the focus. We're all trying to grow and help our students grow every day to get better. So any other questions or closing thoughts from the attendees? Anybody have anything else? I don't see anything else in the chat, but. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for their time, and certainly thank you to you, Tom. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Gosh, all my kids are out of school, but I kind of want to send my grandchildren to Central Square because you guys really have it together. You're doing great things, and we appreciate your contributions and certainly appreciate your time today. But thank you for everything you're doing to help teachers get better and help improve instruction. So we appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.